Taxi!
Where to, mate?
Hello, mate. 55 Tufton Street, please.
55 Tufton Street, SW1. Yep, I know it well. Hop in, sir. This is A Nation of Taxpayers, a weekly podcast from the Taxpayers Alliance.
On this episode of A Nation of Taxpayers with me, Duncan Barkes, alongside me is Elliot Keck from the Taxpayers Alliance. Welcome once again.
Hello, Duncan.
Good to see you. And our guest this week is Daniel Herring, Head of Economic and Fiscal Policy at the Centre for Policy Studies. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Good to see you. Now, there's only one real story in town this week, and what I will do is show to my guest in the studio a picture I want them to describe to you, listening at the moment, in your own unique way, gentlemen. Let's start off with you, Elliot. Look at that picture. Tell our listener who it is and what she looks like.
Yeah, I think, firstly, it's Rachel Reeves, and she's got the look of someone who's, been having an affair for a couple of years, believed that her husband would never ever find out, but actually she knew in reality he would find out eventually. And I think to tie that into what she said in her speech yesterday, essentially she announced that everyone was going to have to pay more in income tax. But this was always the inevitable consequence of her decision-making last year. They went on what it turned out to be one of the biggest spending sprees of any government in history outside of peacetime, outside of wartime rather, and outside of pandemics, which she tried to ask businesses, family farmers, private schools, etc., to pay for, but which she knew they wouldn't be able to pay for. And so as a result, as I said, she hoped that she could keep her affair secret for as long as possible, but she's now realised actually the time is up.
It's a really good analogy. Daniel, your view on that particular shot, and just for context, it was off the back of Tuesday morning's 10 minutes past 8, slightly bizarre address to the nation. I mean, if you're doing your school run, the last thing you want to do is listen to this on the radio. How would you define that picture?
Yes, she looks like someone who, I can't be Elliot's
it's quite
description,
good,
but she looks like someone who's trying to say something without actually saying it, which, as you've said, is her trying to make the case that income tax probably rises is necessary, but she's not going to say it yet. And then, which of course meant that the whole thing was this bizarre kind of spectacle where we're all know what she's saying, but we can't quote her as actually saying it.
Yeah.
My assessment, when I saw this picture, and it's from the Times newspaper, you would have seen it online since she made this address to the nation. I just found myself looking at this image and becoming slightly obsessed by it. She looks dead behind the eyes. That's what I found myself thinking. Look at that. There is no soul there, right? Yeah. Do you think that's a reasonable assessment?
Well, I think she also knows that probably her as I said, her time is up, and probably I would imagine she won't be Chancellor for much longer after this budget, because I think it's going to be so disastrous, so catastrophic. And Starmer is very, very, very good at recognising when he needs to ditch someone, when he needs a fall guy. He's used many, many people in before, half of Downing Street, half the shadow cabinet before. And I think Reeves is going to be the next fall guy, and she's well aware that that's the role that she's going to be playing.
Now, let's talk about just a little bit, because I'm keen to get your views on this. If you like, I suppose we could use the term optics, but maybe the strategy behind making this kind of announcement, peak time. If you worked in breakfast TV or radio, you go in the morning, you think, what the hell's happening here? We're going to have to massively re-edit our running order or whatever. Was it, do you think, a clever thing to do? Because I think we can all agree that we knew something like this was going to happen, because they've been rolling the pitch over the last several months. Over the last several months, they started rolling back, if you like, on this. We're not going to raise taxes or whatever. They stopped saying that. We knew increasingly there were some hints coming. We knew that the budget on the 26th of November was not going to be pleasant. Do you think this was the right bit of strategy, the right mechanic to say to people, hey, guys, something at the end of this month is going to be pretty unpalatable?
I think that they would try and argue that they're trying to level with the British people, and she did. She was, as Daniel said, she did not explicitly say she was going to increase income tax. No. She did say everyone was going to have to contribute more, pay their bit, or I can't remember the exact language, which is a fairly unambiguous mention that you're going to do either income tax, VAT, or national insurance, and combine that with the reports, it's clear which one she's heavily leaning towards. But when you've been dishonest with the public for as long as they have done, when you were as clear in your manifesto as you were, when you've been as clear since the last budget that you won't raise taxes, this idea that you can suddenly be honest with the British people, I find it very, very difficult to stomach.
Yeah. Your take, Daniel, was this the right thing to do?
I mean, maybe in the context of the overall strategy, maybe it was or wasn't. I thought the whole thing was bizarre and kind of strange for her to come out and sort of say she's being honest but not actually tell us what she's going to do. I probably would have respected her more if she just would have come out and said, hey, your income tax is going to go up. Sorry, we're breaking our manifesto commitment. And then at least she would be being clear, and then at least we'd stop speculating about all this stuff, and people can just get on with their lives. But in the wider context of the whole process has been crazy, because we've been talking about this for months and months and months.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And it is so damaging to business confidence. It's so damaging to all sorts of decision making, both in business but also in just people's lives. And there's reports about the property market kind of coming to a halt because of this. And it just doesn't seem like a very grown-up way to do fiscal policy. There should be more of a kind of clearer decision-making process, so people at least have a sense of what's coming more explicitly, I think.
Even at the basic level, like I know people that are thinking about their summer holidays next year and wondering whether to scale them back because they don't know if they're actually going to be paying, £100, £200 more in income tax. They just have no idea, right? And it's even, but obviously the business level is far more important for the sort of overall economy, but just in terms of sort of people's day-to-day lives, which I think should never be just ignored by policymakers. And life and the economy is not just numbers and graphs; it's real people, real families, etc.
There's a bigger thing here, and Daniel, you touched on it, which is this Chancellor talks about her number one mission, or has done in the past, being about growth, right?
Yeah.
And if you're running a business now, this date for a budget is so late in the year.
Yeah.
So if you're a business operator, you're holding back, you're not making any decisions. But also, you can argue what you said on Tuesday morning at 10 minutes past 8 will just make people freeze even more due to the uncertainty. We all know that growth comes from the private sector, right? I was reading the other day that about 60% of the private sector is made up of small businesses. Those small businesses will not be doing anything, right? Will not be doing anything. No. And you think, you keep banging on about the importance of growth, and by God do we need it, yet you're not doing anything to support it, which can only lead me to conclude either, and I'm sorry to be blunt about it, she is remarkably dim, or they just don't understand how important it is for the private sector to have confidence in the government.
Yeah, I think they're so. I think you said dead behind the eyes, and I think she is so constrained by her party, her manifesto commitment, the OBR, and some of those constraints, I think, we would say are good things. It stops her spending more than we'd like her to. But she's so constrained by these things that she's having to kind of jump through these verbal gymnastics, and that means that there's really no sense of strategy or a plan. She's jumping from fiscal event to fiscal event without any kind of long-term goal, and I think that the dead behind the eyes thing is also quite apt, I think, because there's no sense from her of a vision or a desire for what she wants to do, leadership. Yeah. And I think it's crazy because this is literally probably her dream job. Her whole life she's probably wanted to do this. And I've never seen her talk about, if that was me, I would be itching to do big tax reforms, big reforms to planning and things like that. And you just get the sense that she's so cautious about it and unwilling to take some risks. And that could be risks either way. She may do things that we don't like, but she's just unwilling to do anything really. And now it feels like she's just kind of holding on to the role without any desire to do something that, her children would be proud of or people in 50 years will look back and go, oh, that was a chancellor that did something.
Yeah, sort of like a Geoffrey Howe budget, Nigel Lawson budget.
Yeah.
One of those where we look at as, really transformational moments for the tax system, for the economy. Some people, see it as a negative change, positive, whatever. But what's really interesting about, we talk about pitch rolling, this idea that you get the public, you get businesses ready for what might be coming in a piece of legislation, or in this case, in a budget. And normally, I think in a budget, it's relatively clear what they're going to do. I think it was relatively clear last year from early on when they came in, it was going to be national insurance on employers, capital gains tax. It was there was a couple of bits and pieces where maybe there was some uncertainty, but people generally had a decent idea. The amount of stuff that has been thrown out there is absolutely extraordinary. They've talking about capital gains tax on primary residences, i.e. if you sell your home, you're taxed on the difference between the purchase price and the sale price. They're talking about limits on how much you can save tax-free into your ISA. They're talking about limited liability partnerships for, I think that's what they're called, for doctors, GPs, lawyers, etc. They're talking about income tax. They're talking about reforming council tax, stamp duty. It is almost the whole tax system
wasn't it?
that they've sort of gently floated, but it's only really income tax where you feel like there's been any sort of momentum and any sort of. So you're talking about delayed business decisions. And there's always, to some extent, delayed business decisions ahead of a budget because there's always a bit of uncertainty. But that's mitigated by the fact that normally there's a good idea that, okay, this won't be touched. This probably will be. Maybe there's some stuff in the middle. We're sort of in this state that not only do we have a very long time until the budget, which is a problem with that uncertainty, the level of uncertainty about exactly what she might do, and that's compounded by the fact that, we hear there's a £10 billion black hole, there's a £50 billion black hole. And I really think where the speech was I thought the speech really failed was she could have been very clear. This is how much we're looking to raise.
Yeah.
These are the general areas that we're looking to raise it from. These are the things that we're going to leave off the table. That inevitably, she was not going to announce the budget there and then. But she could have started, what's the flying kites? She could have, started shooting down some kites, I think, and she didn't.
No, she just created further uncertainty. Listen, Daniel, we got you in to talk about the CPS document, Tax Reforms for UK Growth. We'll get onto that in a second, but just a few minutes to chew over another speech that was made earlier this week, this time by Nigel Farage, leader of Reform UK, because I want to get your reaction on what he said or possibly didn't say. But the essence of it really, essentially rowing back on some of the previous pledges made in their, they called it a contract for the people, didn't they, on the run up to July's election last year. Not so much a manifesto talking about tax cuts, etc. Farage basically saying, or trying to give the impression that we've grown up a little bit, we've realised that maybe now's not the right time to do it, and rowing back a little bit. Your reaction, Daniel, to what he said?
Yeah, I thought it was okay. I didn't watch the whole thing. I watched bits of it, and I thought it was pretty. I thought it was okay. I thought it lacked detail. I thought there would be some bigger, kind of punchier announcements in there, but it probably achieved what he was trying to do in kind of reframing Reform as a serious party. I think. If you ask my personal opinion on their specific policies that they rode back on, I would probably, if I was going to make tax cuts of that magnitude, I probably would have done them in different places. For example, I think the personal allowance is so expensive as a policy.
And that was to go up to 20 grand.
Up to 20 grand.
Very high.
And I think I would probably make the case it should be better to bring higher marginal rates down further up the income spectrum. I think that would have a more positive effect. So I hope that as they kind of evolve as a party, they take a more finer look at the tax system and say, there's some areas here which would have bigger bang for our buck in terms of improving growth and productivity. So I'm hoping for them that's the start of a journey that moves them towards that sort of policy area.
Yeah, Elliot, there's certainly a view that this is something that Reform needed to do because it's now realising it might end up in government at some point. And maybe their Achilles heel was their economic policies or plans that some people would go, these numbers don't stack up. Was Nigel Farage right to make that speech?
I have to say I was a little disappointed with it. I think Daniel is right that if you're going to, any program of tax reform, £20,000 for the personal allowance probably is too high. I think it should be higher than what it is now. It's been frozen for a long time, but I think actually the paying of tax is an important part of sort of socialising you into a free market economy. And if under £20,000 anyone's not paying tax, they're not going to really understand what it's like to pay significant amounts of money to the state. But to come back to Farage's speech, what I'm worried about with Farage's speech is he sort of bought into this left-leaning, centre-left, sensibilist theory about tax and tax cuts that they're a bit of an indulgence, they're a bit of an extravagance. They're a nice luxury to have if you have a lot of economic growth and we can start cutting taxes, but they're not good in terms of their dynamic impacts on the economy. There's something that, of course, everybody would like. It would all be nice to have tax cuts, but we simply can't afford it. The problem is tax cuts are one of your best levers at generating economic growth. So if you have a weak economy, that is the time when you should be looking at tax cuts. Now, with gilt yields where they are, with the UK's national debt where it is, obviously you cannot have a drastic set of policies that massively reduces revenues without a close to equivalent reduction in spending. But there is a lot that you can do where the short to medium term dynamic impacts are probably significant enough that actually a lot of the revenue you lose, you regain. The most obvious one is stamp duty. But I even think the withdrawal of the personal allowance above £100,000, when you look at the graph, the number of people that earn between 100 and 125 grand, it sort of drops off a cliff because everyone just stops working until they can get to a point where they can get over that 125 grand point. I think you get a lot of people, and I know people that work 4-day weeks because there's no point in working that fifth day. You lose so much of that money. Again, the withdrawal of the various child allowances that happens at £100,000 that I know is in the paper. You know, there is actually probably quite a lot on tax that you can do that doesn't need massive, huge spending cuts to generate growth. So I just felt he gave into that sort of left-leaning orthodoxy that tax cuts are a bit of an indulgence, and that was a bit disappointing because Farage is nothing if he doesn't push against orthodoxies.
Time will tell. Let's crack on with the CPS document, Tax Reforms for UK Growth. Daniel, just give us a bit of background to this.
Yeah, so one thing we sort of, if you work in tax policy long enough, you realise there's a huge amount of disagreement over the levels of taxation and the size of the state and all of that. But in terms of the types of tax and the complexity of the tax system, there's a huge amount of agreement from kind of centre-left, centre-right on the fact that the system is too complicated and it raises money in really inefficient ways. And so back in June, we got together a bunch of these people and we just got them in a room and we said, okay, like what do we agree on here? And then the question was, well, how do we frame this agreement in a way that's helpful to government and public? So we came up with this, we sort of all together came up with this document, Tax Reforms for Growth, with the aim of sort of presenting that. And we've done 7 packages, and each package is designed in a way that can be revenue neutral. It's not a hugely detailed document. It's only about 16 pages. And the reason for that was because there's so much written on tax policy anyway. So you can go out and find all the detail on this as well. And so there's package 1 is on property taxes. Package 2 is on VAT. The 3rd and the 4th are on income taxes. The 5th is on landlords. 6th is on capital gains tax, and the 7th is on corporation tax.
Okay, and specifically for our listener, just give some background to the essence of some of those key points under those packages.
Yeah, so on property taxes, what we've said is we think that you should get rid of stamp duty and update council tax. The fact that council tax is based on old values, it's not updated regularly, should be done. On VAT, what we want to see is lowering the VAT rate, but broadening the VAT base. Income tax is much of is what Elliot just said before about kind of reducing that high marginal rate at £100,000 and looking at childcare subsidies. We also want to sort of bring NICs, so that's national insurance contributions and income tax together, kind of see.
Yeah.
It seems wrong to, I think, most people that employment income is treated differently to other types of income. Landlords, we want to look at profits. We just want to make it easier for them to deduct some of their interest payments. And then capital gains, the bigger idea, that's slightly controversial, but we want to look at an investment allowance, which means that you wouldn't get taxed on things like inflation.
Yeah.
Finally, corporation tax is just extending capital allowances.
Okay, all right. Yeah. You've had quite a few people support your document. Just run through some of the organisations who have said, we like the sound of this.
So Centax, that's the Centre for Analysis of Taxation, has sort of helped in authoring this. We've also got IPPR, Joseph Rowntree Foundation on the left. Dan Needle is another supporter. And then on the right, we've got Adam Smith Institute, Bright Blue, and us, Centre for Policy.
So you would say that your document so far gets support from both the left and the right?
Yeah, on the whole.
Okay, but there are some organisations who haven't put their name to it. One of which is the Taxpayers Alliance.
Yeah, and it came down to the fact that it's revenue neutral, and I can understand that if you're trying to influence Labour policy, any tax proposal you come up with that cuts revenue is not going to fly. They clearly cannot cut spending. They've tried to cut spending. Their backbenchers have defeated them time and time and again. But we're just at the point now where we just think that any proposal for tax reform that doesn't cut revenue and ideally cut revenue significantly is just not one we can support. And the bigger concern I have with anything like this is, the left don't do this to the right. When you have a conservative government, when you have a right-wing government, and let's say they say, okay, we're going to drastically cut immigration, we're going to cut it down to the tens of thousands, we're going to massively deport illegal immigrants. You don't see left-wing migration charities come together with right-wing groups working on this stuff to say, okay, fine, we sort of accept that this might have to happen, but can we talk about ways to ensure that the migrants coming here are the most deserving, or that we still have lines open for asylum seekers? They just go on the attack because they know that if you don't hold the line, then inevitably you're going to be used sort of as cover. And so to pick up on a couple of these things, so there are a few of these measures that are eminently sensible. The abolition of stamp duty, looking at some of the marginal rates. The really obvious one that struck out to me is the fact that landlords are not allowed to deduct mortgage interest from their income for tax purposes. So they have to, that's deducted from their profits rather. My issue is Labour are not going to bring in that policy. Labour are not going to do anything to make it easy for landlords. They've just brought in the Renters Reform Bill, which is the biggest assault on landlords possibly in UK history. They're not about to do that. However, they may do a couple of the bits that I know that I know this, Centre for CPS and some of the other organisations would be far more uncomfortable about. Now, the problem with this is these are supposed to all be designed as a package, which as a package, if everything was introduced, would make the tax system overall better, not better in every individual area. Where I have concern about something like this is actually what tends to happen is governments and chancellors pick and choose. And
let's talk about that for a second. Yeah. I mean, Daniel, I don't want you to feel like you're being ganged up upon.
No, it's fine.
There's some interesting stuff there.
Yeah.
So, is there not a danger with your document that the government or the Treasury will just cherry pick the bits that they think, hang on a second, we can do something with this, but actually some of the other bits that you suggested just get left behind?
Look, that is a risk, and we've done our best to articulate them. I guess the reason we articulated them as packages is because we said, it's a give and take.
Yeah.
And it certainly is a risk that Labour could just say, well, we'll take this, slice, and look, everyone supports it, and we would come out quite strongly and say, no, that's not what we said, right? Like pretty much any tax rise without a corresponding cut or simplification is not pro-growth.
No.
I can't think of an exception to that. Maybe someone could, but I think our view would be, if you're going to raise taxes in one area, you need to lower them, and net that could be positive, and that's what this document is trying to get across. To go to speak to the broad point, that's been the problem with tax policy in general. I don't think we've had a chancellor who's genuinely interested in tax reform.
No.
For decades probably. And the reason the tax system is so complicated is because every chancellor comes along and says, I want to do this gimmick here or this thing here, or I want to do this tweak here, and no one will notice. And over time you get this complete mess of a system that someone needs to come and almost sweep away a whole load of it, because a whole load of it just gets in the way of people getting on with their lives. And I think with the tax system and the budget is like this as well. It's like people should really think about them as little as possible. That should be the principle of a good tax system, right? Is people shouldn't be trying to alter their behaviour or be like, what's going to happen in 3 weeks' time, and how do I optimise to get around that? Businesses should just almost not even notice the chancellor having a budget. That would be the ideal world, right?
Yeah.
And that we here talk about this stuff and no one else really listens because it's so simple and straightforward. They don't need to worry about it.
The tax system is in such a mess that inevitably there will need to be a budget where everybody notices, because you try and sweep away everything that all of the barnacles that have accumulated on the boat. But I think the idea is beyond that point, beyond that moment where you reset the tax system to something like, for example, the TPA single income tax. At that point, businesses stop noticing, because each budget is just a minor tweak. Maybe there's some maybe there's some new technology or new innovation or new change to the economy that does mean actually there's a loophole that's opened up, and there will always need to be those small little tweaks. But
I mean, it would also be more honest, right? What would be great is if you look at there are countries with better tax systems that have higher tax rates.
Most
right?
countries have better tax systems.
Most
I think
countries
we're at that point now.
But if you look at like somewhere like Sweden, which is a very high tax country, it's not a country I want to emulate, but at least income taxes there are honest, right?
Yeah.
People pay a large amount of tax, and they can't. It's not hidden from them in all these random ways. It's quite simple. It's quite straightforward. And then at an election, Labour versus Conservatives could be like, we're going to give you more, but we're going to tax you way more. And Conservatives are going to say, we're going to spend less, but we're going to tax you less. And it's a very straightforward system. It's income tax or VAT. Those are the two main taxes that raise the most money. And we're going to raise it or lower it.
Yeah.
And then you would have a debate that isn't kind of obscured by all these ridiculous wheezes here and there about where to squeeze the most money out of this activity, which is so harmful in the long run.
Yeah, and I mean, you saw this in the last Conservative government, right, where they cut national insurance by 4p and claimed to be a tax-cutting government, but the tax burden rose as a percentage of GDP.
Yes, exactly.
And that's because they were just finding new and ingenious ways to squeeze people.
Yeah, and you had of course, it wasn't bracket inflation. It wasn't being updated with inflation, so more and more people are being pushed into higher rates.
Elliot, you said that the TPA can't sign this because all of it's revenue neutral, right?
Yeah.
Out of these 7 packages, can you just go through them and tell our listener the ones that maybe the TPA are more warmer to than others?
So it's interesting. So, I mean, again, some of these come within the context of a radical reform of the tax system. So a very obvious one is the TPA could support in principle a lowering of VAT to 10-15p and its application to everything. But with that revenue, you would need to make drastic tax cuts. Right? I mean, you're talking about getting rid of CGT, stamp duty, capital gains tax, corporation tax. We're talking about a completely radical reform of the tax system. Again, obviously, as I said, the landlords allowing them to claim mortgage insurance off their profits for tax purposes, obviously very sensible. Some of the stuff on marginal rates, particularly the childcare marginal rate, as well as the 60p. I don't know the 60p is mentioned, but I think certainly the withdrawal of child allowances at £100,000. Combined with that 60p rate, I can't remember what the marginal rate is. Is it 85p or something like that?
There's two places where it happens. One is at
£50,000.
Well, it's now £60,000.
That's right.
You get your child benefit withdrawn between £60,000 and £80,000, and the marginal rate depends on how many children you have. So it can vary from. It can go up to like 70 or 80%. And then the next one is the child withdrawal at £100,000, which is essentially a complete withdrawal. It's not withdrawn over time, so it's almost an infinite percentage. Because it just gets taken away. Yeah. And it means that if, for example, if you had 2 kids under 4, I think the number is something like you would have to get to about £140,000 before you're actually better off than you would be at £99,000.
Which is just insanity. Merging income tax with national insurance is something we've supported for a long time, albeit, again, in the context we support a single income tax of 30p on all income above a personal allowance. That means the abolition of the 40p rate, the 45p rate, and all the other nasty little marginal things in between. And again, comes within the context of the TPA abolishing most of the other taxes that currently are in existence. So it's it's one of those things where there's definitely individual bits and pieces, and I can certainly see if introduced overall as a package, it could improve the tax system. But again, I just think that the nature of these things is they get cherry picked.
Sorry, you go.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask, what's the TPA's? Where would the TPA make kind of big spending cuts to offset the taxes?
I mean, listen, that's where you get into very difficult territory, right? And this is something that is always tough to talk about, but you do have to look at the state pension. Yeah. Certainly abolishing the triple lock. Certainly raising the state pension age to probably 70. I know, sorry, Duncan. And this is difficult I'm sure this will be difficult for some of our listeners, but that's where, it's about £5 trillion is the current state pension liability. That's how much it's double the size of the UK economy. You do need to abolish defined benefit pensions in the public sector. Yes. You do need to look at means testing pretty much all benefits, and also probably removing benefits from people with mental health conditions, certainly anything but the most severe. You do need to drastically cut the size of the civil service. You need to look at introducing sort of a co-payment system in the NHS where you are responsible for paying for some of your healthcare. There's stuff you can do to incentivize that. I think allowing you to deduct health insurance from your taxable income is it's absolutely crazy that you not only do we not do that, you have to pay tax if your employer gives you health insurance. So if your employer gives you health insurance worth £10,000, whatever it is, or £5,000, and you're paying 40, you're in the 40p tax rate, you have to pay an additional £2,000, right? I mean, it's completely wrong. I mean, it's just it's considered your income, right?
But the employer can write it off. Is that right? I guess it's just considered a payment.
Yeah, it's considered your income. Yeah. So I mean, I guess they would if they would be able to reduce that against their profits, they would consider that their operating costs or whatever. But yeah, as an individual, you then have to pay that tax. So that's a few big, but they are really big ticket items.
It's a good list.
Yeah, and just for the record, I plan to be doing this podcast in 25 years' time, right? So
exactly. You won't need the triple.
No, it's fine. Let's just wrap up this podcast, Daniel. So you produced this document. Obviously, people can check it out for themselves on the CPS website.
Yes.
Is there a process that you follow to get this in front of people who could actually absorb it, and perhaps one day it could become policy?
Well, I mean, we don't have a defined process, but we're always in conversation with, particularly people on the centre right, the Conservative Party is one group. I think we'll try and get this in front of Reform as well. And then there are other signatories who will be able to get it in front of Labour.
Daniel, it's been really interesting. Thank you for coming in. Come back in the future?
Yes, of course.
You didn't feel ganged up upon?
No, it was very friendly. Thank you.
Oh, we'll have to try hard on it.
I did my best.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. This has been The Nation of Taxpayers, the podcast from the Taxpayers Alliance. Do check out our archive. It is vast. It goes back over a year now, so you can search for A Nation of Taxpayers on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, also on YouTube as well. And if you'd like to make a suggestion for a future guest or maybe ask some questions or whatever, the email address is podcast@taxpayersalliance.com.